Hi everyone, and welcome to our ADD, ADHD, and sensory webinar. If you're on live with us today, that's awesome. And also if you happen to be catching this as a replay, maybe you're watching it in the evening after you've struggled to get kids down to bed, or you catch it later in the morning after a difficult transition, from mornings into the school day. Wherever it is, wherever you're watching this, I want you to know we're here for you, and I can't wait to dive into what we're going to be talking about today, which is the three different types of kids that we typically scan and assess in our office that deal with things like ADD, ADHD, and different sensory struggles. And notice we didn't say that the categories that we're working with are ADD, ADHD, autism, and those labels that kids typically come in with, because in our office, one of my favorite things that we say is we don't work with diagnosis, right? Because once we've worked with one child with a sensory struggle, we've worked with one child with that sensory struggle, because every kid is so different in the way that they present, and and all of the different challenges, and how they're affected by different sensory things, and how their story and their recipe of stress has built up. And so we really like to look at it as more of categories of how kids present, and then we look to break down and say how do they respond once we start working with their nervous system and work with their body, and how do they respond to the care that we give, as we build custom care plans through the process here in our office. So welcome, my name is Dr. Jeremy Pfau. I'm a chiropractor here at Experience Wellness Chiropractic in Plymouth, where we really specialize in pediatrics and prenatal work, and we have a true passion for helping kids that struggle with sensory issues, whether it's whether they've been labeled, and whether they have a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD or sensory processing disorder, whether they're on the spectrum of autism, whether it's anywhere along that spectrum. We have an absolute passion for helping these kids thrive. When we work with kids, it isn't about working with a diagnosis. Like I said before, we don't see the letters, we don't see the labels. What we see with kids is we see potential. We work with kids, we work with people, we work with families, and work to see how can we help these children start to thrive and start to really truly reach their potential, which is different for everyone. And the fun part is helping to see the families start to recognize that and really start to unravel these stressful patterns that really don't just affect the child involved, they really truly affect the whole family. So when we can start to see kids start to unwind, we can really see the health and happiness of an entire family start to thrive and start to build. So I want to dig right in, because we said we were going to dig into the three different categories of kids and cases that we see in our office. And when I say the three different categories of kids that we see in our office, we really categorize them based on the scans that we take. So here at Experience Wellness, we have a neurological scanning technology that we'll kind of highlight as we go through this, and we'll talk through what that means. But essentially we're looking at what is their nervous system processing, and how is the brain perceiving and coordinating a response. So we look at muscle tone through EMG sensors along the spine and musculature that holds the spine together. We look at thermography, which is temperature balance along the spine, which tells us whether or not the nervous system is controlling blood flow the way that it's supposed to be. And then we look at what's called heart rate variability, where we analyze heart rhythms to find out whether or not your child is stuck in what we call that fight or flight stress response. Because chances are, if the energy is through the roof, and if they can't really control their body, and they're really quickly agitated, and they're easily disrupted emotionally. They can't quite calm down. Chances are they're stuck in that fight or flight response. We oftentimes call it, the gas pedal is stuck down. It's a very easy analogy for parents to understand. It's like they're constantly on the go. Their gas pedal's always down. We can't get access to the brakes. So those are the scans that we look to analyze. And when we analyze the scans, kids typically fall in one of three categories. The first category that we typically see is what we call a raging bull kind of a kiddo. So raging bull means energy is through the roof. It means that these are the kids that are constantly go, 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 go. They're seeking sensory stuff all of the time. Oftentimes they're craving high energy things like high energy foods and sugary foods. They're craving high, fast-paced atmospheres. A lot of times these are the kids that can't seem to focus in daily life and in school, but they can focus on high stimulation video games for hours on end as their brain just needs this high sensory input of energy. These kids oftentimes have pretty significant sleep issues because they can't turn the energy off, right? We look at bedtime becomes this, hour plus long event where it's like, how do we just pump the brakes with these kids? How do we just get their brain to, right, just take a deep breath and calm down, where we just, they're always on the go, 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 and we just need to access that brake pedal. These kids typically have a very low threshold for change and transitions, meaning it's very, very difficult to move from one thing to the next because they're so just balled up and strung up on everything else. There's usually little to no remorse for actions and activities. They just kind of are on to the next thing, not really thinking about the consequences or the ramifications of their actions. There's just this lack of focus because they're just spinning so fast. Oftentimes, we can liken these kids to, if you're in my age group, like the Tasmanian devil, right? They're just go, 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 and anything that comes at them just tends to bounce right off, right? Whether it's some type of calming mechanism, or whether it's information, or whether it's information at school, or it's instructional things, and it's all of these different inputs. They're just bouncing off because there's so much energy happening all the time that nothing really sinks in. The perception of their system really isn't where we want it to be, or where they need it to be in order to grow and thrive and move forward. Oftentimes there's issues with bedwetting. There's issues with too much energy in certain areas, so there isn't energy focused in other areas. So when we have these type of kiddos, they're oftentimes very much shifted in our HRV scans to a fight or flight, right? They're oftentimes very, very shifted into this survival mode stress mechanism happening inside all of the time, and so they're always on edge, and they're always easily to that next heightened sense of awareness. When we do the scans on these kids, not only do we see their HRV, that heart rate and rhythms shifted into stress, but when we measure their muscle scans, there's usually energy off the charts. These are the kids whose bodies are really tense. Oftentimes they're pretty muscular kids, they're lean kids, and their energy is just really crazy through the roof. But oftentimes they're very well patterned. And when I say pattern, I mean they're pretty well coordinated kids. They're not super clumsy. They might be really good athletes. These are the type of kids, raging bull kids, that just have crazy amounts of energy, and it's energy everywhere, but it's fairly well organized. So that's number one. We have pretty good symmetry in their muscle systems. Oftentimes posture isn't a huge issue. So raging bull kids are number one. And my favorite thing to do is to just watch these kids once they start getting adjusted, just to start to go melt. It isn't uncommon after their first couple of adjustments for all of a sudden, for them to go home and just crash like they haven't slept, for ages, because all of a sudden their body just hits that brake pedal. So we'll get into some of that here in a minute. So category number one is raging bulls. And category number two is what we call the drunken bull. And these are like almost the exact opposite from what we see with the raging bull kiddos, is that these are kiddos that are not super, super high energy. These are not the ADHD type diagnosis. These are more sensory processing diagnosis. These are more ADD, so focus type struggles, coordination type struggles. These are kids that maybe had motor delays and things like that as they were going through developmental stages, or maybe they're in that right now. Maybe we're just starting to deal with some motor delays and things where we're just not quite coordinated, almost like things just aren't connecting. The dots aren't really connecting from the brain and their body, and when they're actually processing information, maybe it seems like there's a bit of a disconnect. Like you can almost see the wheels turning in the brain as they're trying to process something, but you can tell that the connection isn't there for them to coordinate the response that should go along with it. These kids are typically, issues with balance and issues with tripping a lot. They take a little bit longer as they learn to walk, and then as they start getting involved with sports, you can tell they're just not quite up to par with the coordination of the other kids that are their age. These kids typically get overwhelmed pretty easily. Oftentimes these are kids that parents will, as we sit and talk with parents, let's say they shut down really easily. They get overwhelmed and they kind of go into this internal shutdown where they don't they don't meet the world with the energy that's coming to them. They just they get overwhelmed. They're very shy. They tend to be very reserved, and they go from there. A lot of times we'll see kids like in our Drunken Bull category that are considered to be very low tone, or they'll have speech issues. A lot of times there's a lot of oral things that come along with that. So like I said again, this isn't the hyperactive kids. These are the lower energy, more discoordinated kids. And when we do scans with these kids, the biggest thing that we see energy patterns that don't really fit where we want, meaning they're not crazy tense all over the place. We don't see a lot of energy throughout all of their muscles. We see a disorganized energy in their system. We see muscle energy really firing way up in the upper neck, and then we see a core that doesn't really support their system. And then we see a lot of energy and muscle firing down in the low back, almost like they have this compensation response to a system that doesn't really support itself very well. So we start to see a lot more disorganization than we see overfiring in energy. With that, when we do our thermal scans, a lot of times we see big imbalances when we measure from the bottom to the top. We roll a thermal scan from the base of the spine to the top. We'll oftentimes see big areas of cooling, which means that their system isn't, it's almost like it's a blunted signal, almost like everything is just really bogged down. These are common terms that we hear from parents when we sit down and they tell us they just don't really have the energy that their siblings have, right? They're kind of discoordinated, and things just aren't really firing. The last piece that we see when we look at, we have these raging bulls of super high energy, pretty good pattern, but everything's just out to here. And then we go to the drunken bulls where it's energy that's very disorganized, so it's just not where you want it to be. The last piece is the combination of both. That's the kids that we call the raging drunken bull, right? Where we have crazy amounts of energy, and energy's all over the place, but where it's firing is like crazy high energy, and then still more energy than we like, and then imbalanced energy. So it's like this combination of both kids where they're really bouncing off the walls, but maybe they're doing more things like sensory seeking input, where they're doing more stimming, so they can kind of force energy into their brains. I just did a webinar last week on proprioceptive seeking behaviors. So if this sounds more like your kid, go ahead and tune in back to last week's webinar as well, where we really dive deep into what it means and how all of those receptors fire and why kids seek that proprioceptive input. So we're not going to dig into that now. Go ahead and check that one out. But these kids are often kids that are forcing input into their bodies. Sometimes it can seem self-injurious behavior, where it's hitting, or maybe it's doing spinning, or they're just really reckless with their bodies, and they're kind of all over the place. Oftentimes with these kids, it's more significant sensory type struggles. A lot of the kids that we see that are in our office that are on the autism spectrum come in initially with this raging drunken bull type scan patterns, where it's just so much energy all over the place, and to the point that their body has a hard time even organizing it, and so it comes out as really just a lot of over energetic behaviors, what we call dyskinesis, where it's this output, this unorganized, disorganized output of energy that the body can't really control. And so our job really becomes, how do we start to allow the body to harness that energy as we start to just help the body pump the brakes. So aside from these kids, and we look at the muscle patterns on the scans, the other thing that we oftentimes see with with raging drunken bulls. And this kind of goes along with, with the raging bull too, is that when we do our heart rate variability scan, not only does it say where do these kids sit on this scale of fight or flight stress on one end and rest and digest system on the other end, but it also looks at where do they sit on the scale of reserve, how much energy is in their body to simply meet the demand of their daily life. And we oftentimes see these kids really, really low on the reserve, that their body is wasting so much energy that they just don't have enough to manage other areas in their daily demand. Maybe there's significant immune challenges that come along with their other diagnosis. Maybe they're sick all the time. They're the kids that always catch colds and flus and strep throat, and they can never really get ahead of what's happening. A lot of these kids also deal with digestive issues or respiratory struggles. There always seems to be something else that comes with it, because their body spends so much energy trying to just handle the muscle tone and all of the sensory input that it can't devote any energy to all of those rest and digest functions. They get stuck in this fight or flight response, and their body never seems to just be able to pump the brakes and calm down and rest and digest and grow and develop. One of my absolute favorite quotes that we talk about in our workshops all of the time is, in this world of pediatric and neurodevelopment, is that you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. So if we have kids that are significantly stressed and they're always on edge and they have a lot of emotional issues, and we know that they've been diagnosed and they're somewhere on this sensory bandwagon, and they deal with immune challenges and all these different things, their bodies get so stressed and they're stuck in this fight or flight mode. That's this protection mode. When our bodies get stuck in protection, we can't access the growth and development part of our brain and nervous system. And so when we start to see kids falling behind in school, and we start to see kids falling behind in their neurodevelopment, immediately I go, okay, if we're falling behind over here, there's a really, really good chance that their system is locked in over here. And so our job becomes not to treat or diagnose or work with, you're trying to fix these kids and fix their labels and get them, back on track with this. Our job is to simply go, how do we start to unlock and unwind and basically push the brake pedals on this nervous system so they can simply get back to a body that's working at ease. There's this idea that what is really, really common, out there in the public is normal, right? There's this idea of what is common versus what is normal, and we're starting to have this idea that what's common is normal, and that isn't the case, right? So normal is not chronic ear infections. Normal is not unable to sleep. Normal is not an inability to emotionally regulate and transition. Normal is not bouncing off the walls with an inability to control our bodies, or with dangerous behaviors, and we don't have any ability to recognize what's happening around us. That isn't normal, but it's so common now that we're starting to just say, oh, that's this kiddo and he just deals with this, and go, well, let's take a step back and go, well, what if we could simply help that child, help that body pump the brakes? What if we could just access the brake pedal so that they could start to go into growth and development mode and just bring it back to ease? That's really ultimately what our role is in this pediatric chiropractic world, is to remove the interference from the nervous system so we can help restore normal back to a body so it can function in a state of ease. How good does that sound, right? So those are our three different categories of kids that we typically see when we're scanning in our office. They're categories that we have wonderful success in helping not only get back to thriving in a state and thriving in an environment, whether it's at school or whether it's at daycare, or whether it's at home and with siblings. I just had the most amazing conversation with a mom who we're actually going to be doing an interview with tomorrow, who came to our Perfect Storm workshop just a couple of weeks ago and had our son start care. And just as he was getting adjusted yesterday, she said, you won't even believe it, what typically takes us an hour or more to even wind down to go to bed, as soon as we start the bedtime process, as soon as he's in bed, he's asleep within 5 minutes. Like, we're finally starting to see his body access a brake pedal. She said he's been a better brother. He sits down and he starts to read on his own, which is just amazing when a mom, starts to tell you these things, and she's in tears just, 2 weeks into a care plan for this kiddo. So it gets to be so fun when we start to see all of these different categories of kids start to calm, start to access their brake pedal, start to bring ease back into their life, and in turn bring ease back into an entire family. So if this is something, if you're watching us, if you're still with us, and this really resonates with you, and you're like, gosh, this is my kid, this is my son, this is my daughter, we want to help you. This is, it's our purpose to help the families in our community to help reach their potential through chiropractic care, and we want to help you, we want to serve you. So reach out to us, whether you leave a direct message to us, respond right here on this video, get us on Facebook, give us a call the office. We'd be happy to open up that conversation and find out if we're a great fit for you. But ultimately, we just want to know if we can help and help your family just reach a better state so you can thrive and live to your potential. So thank you so much. We can't wait to help you. We can't wait to help your kids and invite you into our community, so you can see what it's like to live a well-adjusted life. So again, Dr. Jeremy Pfau here at Experienced Wellness, and we can't wait to meet you. Take care. Thank you.